I've been, like I said, when this report came out, I was grieving. I think the best word would be say grieving what I was reading. And I knew it was sort of happening at the same time as we were trying to make the decision to start the Historical Faith Society. To be able to say, well, what can we do? Well, let's try to do something together. Let's try to understand. So I just want you to know that we are working on developing training. We're going to have more and more of these podcasts where we're going to start training parents and grandparents on what to do. And one of the most simple ones is family devotions. Getting back to, when I was a kid, sometimes I didn't like it, but every night we would have a time when we would, my mother would read. I grew up in a single parent home. She would read the Bible and we would pray. And you know what? That confidence in the God of the Bible and those biblical accounts was, ironed into my life, as it were. And I think that my biblical worldview was formed very early, that there was a God who heard our prayers. And heard, and we prayed about lots of things because we were on welfare, So it's like if I wanted a bicycle or something, my mother would pray about it, and then I would watch it, in expectation as to what God might do. That's a little my own life story, but I see how it was formed early.
Well, it's true, and we make the assumption that whenever we encounter a person, we can change their worldview quickly if we give them the right information. It's not really the fact, and churches are the proof of that, frankly, where we wait until they're adults and then say, okay, now let's teach them the full counsel of God. Too late at that point. They've been taught the full counsel of the world, and that's what's filling their mind and their heart and their soul at that point. And so we've got to get there early. And, let me just point out one other thing. When I talk about this battle for a person's mind, heart, and soul, their worldview is a long-term battle, and we got to start young. We're talking about a 40 to 50 year turnaround process here. We got to get started now, but we can't be fooled into thinking that because we have good intentions, we may have a few good programs and maybe some good media, that it's going to happen overnight. It's not. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a slow uphill climb, but we've got to be willing to do that. That's what it takes. We abandoned God in America. That's the sad truth of it. And so if we're going to come back to Him, it's going to be a long-term process, and we've got to be committed to it.
Right. And we need to have, I think, being aware of what is going on right now. Obviously, we're seeing the fruit of a lot of behavior that there's a sense of lawlessness in many cases where I thought about that and I thought, well, why is that? It's because people want to be a law unto themselves. And because working in these films, our next film is Journey to Mount Sinai, where the law is given. And I filmed President Shimon Peres, and he said, without the Ten Commandments as a society, you're out of business, And what we're seeing is, without a biblical worldview, you do not have law and order. In many cases, you have some form of people say, well, yes, they have laws, but they're not the type of laws that actually give liberty. And the question of liberty, what is liberty? Is liberty be throwing law off? Well, eventually something's going to come in place of what it is. And I think that's the thing that we're looking at. In the Historical Faith Society, I just felt like something had to happen, and others felt that way, and it struck a nerve. But once again, there's been a trend to discount the historical credibility of the Bible. And so the first films that we started working on was to ask the question, well, what pattern would you look for? And so that's when we were able to make the first films. But then as we went on, we realized that I also know that there's people that are trying to, we have to preserve this and then let other people know about what's happening here. So as far as, closing thoughts here, as far as what should we take away from, I hear you, it's a long journey. In other words, this isn't a sprint that in 2022, things are going to be back to the old time, whatever. This is going to be an arc. And there are two questions that raised in my mind is if people are watching, is there a different they might not have a biblical worldview, is what I'm saying, is that what is the standard that we can use for a biblical worldview so that we can move into the place where we are created for God's intention? And so I guess I have multiple questions, as you can see, and I'm not forming any of them. I'm saying, if we're saying the churches are full of people who don't necessarily have a biblical worldview, and people don't realize it, how do they wake up to that understanding and start to re-examine their own lives? Is that even possible?
I think it is, and there are a lot of different approaches that have been suggested by many different people. We're putting together the same survey that we use across the country to gauge how many Americans have a biblical worldview. We're going to put that online in April or May. We're getting all the technology together now for that. But that will give people a chance to evaluate their own worldview, see how they're doing, figure out maybe where they're weak in their worldview. So that will be one tool. But a real simple thing that you might do is take a Sunday afternoon, take the Bible, go through the 10 Commandments and the Sermon on the Mount. And then, some pastors beat me up for this. They say, oh, that's so simplistic. It's like, yeah, it is, but let's start simple and work our way up. And simply go through all of the principles, all of the commands that are given to us in those two short passages. I mean, we're talking about what 3.5, maybe 4 chapters of the Bible. It's not that much, but write down all the different beliefs and behaviors that are given to us in those 2 well-known sections of the scriptures. And next to each of those, write down, what would this look like in practice? In my life, if I were to do this, what would it look like? And then in the next column, take note of, how well am I doing with this? Am I really living that way? Do I believe this wholeheartedly? Does my life reflect that kind of wholehearted belief? And then maybe in a final column, write down, here's what I need to do to be a better steward of that principle from Scripture, to be someone who's living that out, who's implementing it every moment of every day. And so, I mean, that's kind of a down payment on the full process. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a simple way of getting us to start thinking about, do we know what core biblical principles are? And many of them are given to us in those 2 simple passages, and then am I living those out? Am I reflecting those? If somebody were watching my life, would they see what those principles are by the way that I live? That's probably a reasonable start on this process.
Right.